All right, so the recording has started. All right. All right, so here, so again, welcome to the Environmental Frontiers, sort of virtual kickoff that we're doing. Again, I am learning live as folks, I think, are attempting to chat me and sharing multiple screens here.
We can see your screen fine.
Perfect, thank you, Liz. Okay, here we go. Great. So here's what we are planning to go over today. So as I believe most of you know, the Environmental Frontiers Initiative is piloting several undergraduate research assistant positions this summer. So we're going to walk you through what the nature of those roles are, and also the types of projects that we anticipate student research assistants will be working on through Environmental Frontiers. And as a bit of a primer, Professor Moyer is going to give what we're calling Energy Data 101, just to walk you through some of the basics of the type of data that you would be working with, as again, to kind of pique your interest in what these types of projects are going to entail. A little bit of housekeeping again as we go. So as any of the presenters are going through their slides, if there's a quick clarification that you need, again, please do feel free to chat directly to them, and each of them will do their best to monitor those questions as we go. But we will conclude this virtual session with an open Q&A. And again, you can use, there's a feature called raising your hand. And I will be going through during the Q&A and calling on each of you virtually and giving you a chance to unmute and ask your question. When we do that, do let me know if you'd like me to activate your video or if you'd prefer to just keep your screen blank. All right, so what is Environmental Frontiers, since this should be new to essentially all of you, because it's a new initiative. So again, Liz Moyer and Sabina Sheikh are the faculty co-leaders of this new initiative. So please do, both of you, jump in if there's anything you'd like to add. But really the goal of Environmental Frontiers is to create both research and educational opportunities for students that are at the intersection of sustainability and urbanization. And the main goal is to create a kind of spectrum and a variety of different activities and initiatives that give students a scientific and practical understanding of sustainable urban development. So we envision, as this initiative grows and matures, that eventually there will be a variety of different projects and efforts happening within Environmental Frontiers. So today, the one we're focusing on is what we're, kind of one of the first of these efforts that we're calling EFCampus. So really that's the campus-based component of Environmental Frontiers, in which we can use campus data as a bit of a case study for understanding potential interventions that could be used to make campus more sustainable and improve our environmental footprint, but also think about how we can transfer and generalize those lessons and those analyses to broader urban environments. And so EFCampus is a really interesting and unique experience that's bringing together a variety of campus stakeholders. So it's faculty, students, and staff, as represented by facility services here today, all coming together around these sort of mutual interests of improving campus sustainability and using really a scientific method to understand what opportunities are to improve efficiency of our campus environment. Before I move on, Liz or Sabina, anything you want to add about Environmental Frontiers or EFCampus?
I'll say a little more when it's my turn, but I just am excited about this as an opportunity for student engagement. We've had a bunch of interns, sort of twos and threes of numbers of interns working with facilities since we really kind of started this thing in 2016. We started something called Campus as a Lab. And they've been actually very successful in identifying areas where the university can save both energy and money, which usually go together. So, which also reduces our environmental impact. So there is actually a lot of opportunity, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it.
Awesome.
Great, and I'll just add, also I'm very excited about it. This is Sabina Scheck, and just follow up with what Liz mentioned, that we'd started some of this in 2016. We had course components back then where we looked at waste, and we have another course component this spring focused on water. So we hope to do this both through research and curricular initiatives. So, and I know I'll see some of you in the water course this spring.
Great. And yes, again, as Sabina mentioned, we're talking and focusing on EFCampus today, but there will be other environmental frontiers based curricular activities, as well as other project work. And we are piloting these EFCampus research assistant positions this summer. But again, this is something we're hoping we'll be able to offer on a recurring basis in future quarters as well. So we'll really be looking to use this summer's work and the analysis of students to demonstrate the efficacy of this kind of collaboration and being able to bring all of these different campus stakeholders together. So a little bit of brass tacks about the position specifically. So again, they will be full-time research assistant positions this summer with a stipend. They will no longer, just to be very explicit about this, be offered this spring, unfortunately. And the research assistants will work together in teams on projects that have been sort of pre-scoped by facility services. We're going to hear a little bit more about each of those projects in a minute. And they will also be mentored by Nilanjana Bhattacharya, who is also on this call, and we can hear from her a little bit later. She is a student at Harris, but also has a background and prior career in civil engineering. So she'll be working with the research assistant project teams to really make sure there's a concrete project approach, think about desired objectives, and help kind of see the work through to fruition, working hand in hand with the undergraduate research assistants. And the applications are due tomorrow by midnight. There's a link here in the presentation, which we will also circulate following the session. But it's also on the Mansueto Institute website. So if you are interested after what you hear today, please do be sure to apply tomorrow. And again, just to kind of understand the flow of work during this research assistant position, we are hoping to make selections in the next week or so before the start of the spring quarter. But come summer, there'll be kind of an initial, I guess, onboarding period where you'll be meeting with Nilanjana to get that project plan really firmed up. And then you'll also receive data training directly from the facilities services team on their back end data management systems that cover all of campus utilities and energy data. And then from there, you'll really start doing the projects. We do expect that the research assistant teams will meet with Nilanjana on a recurring basis, and that there will also be sort of pre-scheduled touch points with the facility services team, since they are truly the experts in this data, as you have questions and need additional clarification. So again, this is really a partnership. It's intended to be collaborative and bringing together all these different perspectives to bring to bear, the best that each campus stakeholder group has to offer around these issues. We'll also have a touch point with the full Environmental Frontiers kind of working committee to review some preliminary findings, see how your project work is progressing. And then at the end of the summer quarter, we do expect the research assistant teams to do final presentations on their findings. So we're going, again, Sarah and Brian and Adam from facilities will go through each of these 4 projects in more detail in just a moment. But these are the 4 project options for this summer. And as you apply, we've asked in your sort of statement of interest that you indicate which of these 4 projects would be your preference. We can't at this time guarantee that you will get your preference, because again, it's a little bit of a juggling act and making sure that we're resourcing these projects appropriately. But we are interested in knowing which ones sort of pique your interest and are attractive and kind of further your own educational and developmental goals. So the first 2, just to give you a quick summary, are really around building performance, campus buildings. The third, project number 3, is around kind of increasing transparency and the availability of data via some kind of app or dashboard. And the last one is a cost-benefit analysis, so really understanding a kind of return on investment and what different interventions can yield. So with that, I will turn it over to Liz to do kind of energy data 101. But again, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask more about these roles in the Q&A portion.
Okay, so this should work, that I should have just stolen the screen sharing from Diana. So welcome everybody. I'm gonna give you just a little bit of a basic tutorial. This will be shorter than we had originally hoped because we thought we could be in person. So I'm hoping that you save your questions or have questions for the Q&A session. We'd also originally hoped that we could actually walk you through some of this data usage, but we're doing the best we can with the online format, and hopefully we can continue the conversation. Okay, so as a background, some of you guys will know much of this and some of you won't. My name is Liz Moyer. I'm faculty in the Department of the Geophysical Sciences. I'm also the director of something called the University of Chicago's Center for Robust Decision Making on Climate and Energy Policy. We started working with sort of undergraduates in energy education through an energy technology class that I teach. Every once in a while, not every year, but we'll teach it again at some point. And in 2016, we worked on something that was a sort of nascent program called Campus as a Lab. And this Environmental Frontiers is sort of the outgrowth of that after a couple of years of slowdown. So we were asked, I guess I would say I've found routinely that because maybe we don't have an engineering department, that could be part of it. A lot of undergraduates interested in environmental issues here are missing some of the basics, and I think working on a very concrete applied project is a great way to get those basics, so I highly encourage it. We were very excited when the university expressed interest in having a sort of campus as a lab project where the undergraduates would work directly with campus data. And I think it's a great opportunity to be involved in something that both gives you the training in the technical aspects of environmental impacts. It gives you sort of an opportunity to do collaborative work, much like a real research or professional team. It lets you make a real impact on campus and also learn the sort of the ins and outs of what it really takes to make an environmental impact. So I'm starting with this slide, and if we were in a room together, I would ask you what these buildings are. If you're interested in environmental issues and you don't know what these buildings are, then that tells you should walk around campus more, because this is an old steam plant and a new steam plant. These are down by 62nd Street. These are the buildings in which the university burns natural gas to make steam. So all of the heating of the campus happens in this building and one that's by the football fields, where we burn natural gas, make steam, circulate it around campus. So University of Chicago's energy use is dominated by its buildings, It is a huge amount of energy that we use. The combined cost, if we want to think in dollars, we purchase two things. So actually it's a fairly simple system. We buy natural gas, we burn it in these steam plants, we boil water and make steam, and we circulate the steam around. So that's a big part of our cost. And the other part of our cost is we pay ComEd directly for electricity that they make through other mechanisms. We don't make electricity on campus. And we use that electricity for lights. We use it for running equipment. We use it in some cases for air conditioning. And that actually is the bulk of our energy costs come from electricity. And the sum of those two things for 160 buildings is about $40 million a year. So that tells you several things. It tells you the number is big, which means this is something that, that we spend a lot of. The environmental impact is probably quite large. It also means that we care about this number. So environmental issues are not an abstract thing or something where the university has to lay out money to do the right thing. It's much more of an issue of, can we use less, because using less is better for the environment and it's also better for our bottom line. Okay, so energy basics. And again, if you guys are unmuted, oh, maybe actually, Diana, why don't you unmute people? Can you just unmute people? I would rather just have some people just chip in. If just let everybody, unmute everybody.
Yep.
So I can at least get a little bit of feedback from people. Is that possible?
Yep, I am unmuting all.
Okay, so now it's going to be a little chaotic, and we'll make her mute you again if there's feedback from people's microphones. But how many people have seen this diagram before?
Yep.
Has anybody seen this diagram before?
Yes.
No.
No, I haven't.
So this is the core diagram. It's not a very good version of it, but some version of this is the core diagram for understanding any energy system. This is put together by Lawrence Livermore every year. We actually have a version. I'll give you a link to a version that's actually animated so you can see changes over time. This is the US energy usage. It's total, not per capita, but I can tell you how those numbers convert. But regardless, if you think of this as, we can see the proportion of different fuels that we use and the uses to which they go. So everything on the left side is what we call the primary energy sources, the primary fuels, and everything on the right side is their uses. So we can learn a lot just looking at this. This tells us something about the distribution, how much we use if you understand what those numbers mean, but also the distribution across sources and what we use it for. So one of the things we learned from this is that a very large percentage of US energy use comes from fossil fuels. So about 1/3 comes from natural gas, about 1/3, that's the light blue here, about 1/3 comes from oil, about 1/6 comes from coal, that's gone down significantly, and then maybe 1/6 is non-fossil. That's pretty much the total. And then of that, we can see about 1/3 of all that energy use goes to making electricity. And that electricity is really very heavily going to residential and commercial. Almost all the oil goes to transportation. Okay, so that should give you a basic framework. Does anyone have an immediate question you want to ask about this diagram? It's just to show you we're very, very heavily dependent on fossil fuels, and a very large percentage of our primary energy supply is devoted to making electricity.
What is rejected energy on the right-hand side?
Rejected energy is waste heat. So almost everything we do with all of our fossil fuels involves burning them to make something rotate. Or when we make electricity, rather, what we're doing is burning a fossil fuel, making heat, making something turn, and then generating electricity from it. And in the process of that conversion of heat to motion, there is a necessary loss that is sort of determined by the second law of thermodynamics. So we necessarily waste about 2/3 of the primary fuel that goes into making electricity and is just rejected as heat. That's why power plants have big cooling towers. It's the same thing in your car engine. That's why your car engine gets hot, right? Ideally, you wouldn't want to waste energy heating up your car engine. You just want to move your car forward and have your engine stay cold, but the laws of nature don't let you do that.
The rejected energy is primarily for fossil fuels.
So rejected energy happens anytime you try to turn heat into motion. And so nuclear power here is a method of you make heat from nuclear decay. And then when you turn something with it, you're turning the exact same kind of turbine that you would when you have a fossil turbine thermal plant. And that will also involve rejected energy. So that's just, it looks like waste, but it's not really waste in that sense. It's waste in the fact that anytime you try to turn heat into motion, you're going to have that rejected energy. But it's actually really important, and I'm glad that you pointed that out, because it means that whenever you try to bookkeep electricity, you have to remember that the primary fuels that go into making that electricity are much more than the amount of energy, the amount of power you get out as electricity. Okay, so we're not going to talk too much about units because I don't have access to a whiteboard here, but just to tell you that these units in this diagram are given in something called quads, which is a unit of energy. And this diagram expresses quads, which is quadrillion BTUs, British thermal units per year, because it's showing 1 year's usage. And that's a unit of, anytime we talk about a rate of energy usage, so energy usage per year, that's a unit that's actually a unit of power. And I'm going to try consistently to use units of power that are more understandable to you. And there's one unit of power you probably are quite familiar with. So how do we rate the power of a light bulb? So you guys are unmuted, right? So just tell me, somebody, what's the unit of power that you guys should be most familiar with? Watts, right? So watts is a rate of energy consumption per time. So I'm just going to show you some numbers, and then we're going to think about the energy use at the university itself. And the other reason we should focus on this diagram is, remember, anytime we burn a fossil fuel, so natural gas, coal, or petroleum, that process inevitably produces CO2. So if you care about, the environmental impact in terms of CO2 emissions, all of our energy usage, because we're not driven by renewables, involves burning some kind of fossil fuel, which is a CO2 impact. So the less energy we use, the more money we save, and the less CO2 we emit. The less CO2 the university is individually responsible for. Okay, I need to go fairly fast. I don't want to waste too much time. So here is some numbers which you guys should know, and you probably don't. So we're going to go through these. Leave the bottom. Don't leave the bottom stuff. I want to leave that blank. So I want to think about your power usage as food, which is a basic metric to say if you can turn your energy consumption in the form of food, which we usually call that units of calories per day, but we'll just convert that to watts. And that kind of gives you a metric for how large your other energy uses are. And then we're going to think about the average per capita primary power usage. And then we'll think about the power used for electricity, the efficiency of conversion. We just saw that on the previous graph. So you just saw it was about 30%, right? We waste about 2/3 of any primary energy that goes into making electricity. And that will get out your US average electricity usage. And then we can compare to what we see at the university, which I should have deleted on the bottom here. So all these numbers, I don't know, probably nobody is really comfortable with these numbers, but these are numbers I think everybody should know if you have any environmental interest at all. So does anybody who hasn't heard my lecture before know what your power consumption as food is off the bat? How big is it? And we'll use watts because watts is a number that we should all be comfortable with, a unit that we should be comfortable with. Okay, so this is what I consider like Energy 101 that everybody with environmental interest should know. So here are some numbers. So your power usage as food, and I'm happy to run through this calculation with somebody later if they want, is 100 watts. That's, if you turn 2,000 calories per day, just do a unit conversion, that's what you get, which says that your power consumption is more or less like the electricity you would feed to a regular old incandescent light bulb. The primary power usage, the average primary power usage for the entire US is about 10,000 watts. So that is effectively like having 100 servants. You're feeding 100 servants with fossil fuels, the equivalent of what you would eat from eating sort of more palatable food. Of those, we saw that from the previous diagram, of the primary power, about 1/3 of all those spaghetti lines, the width of those was going to make electricity. So it's about 3,000 watts of primary power are being used to make electricity. it's about a 30% conversion efficiency. We saw that too. So the average US electricity usage is about 1,000 watts of electricity. So remember, these two numbers are different. The top number is watts of primary power. The bottom number is the watts of electricity after you've done the conversion efficiency. So you're ignoring the fact that you really use 3 times as much to make that electricity. So those are the framing numbers. Why do we need to know these? We need to know these because we want to think about what it means to be at the University of Chicago and what it means to talk about a sustainable university. So my guesstimates, or my estimates from some numbers I have from 2015 were, and I have to make some estimate of the number of people who are students or working at the university, is that the average student, staff, faculty, average person affiliated with the university on the campus alone, the consumption is about 2,300 watts of natural gas averaged over the whole year. Obviously, it's higher in the winter. And about 1,500 watts of electricity in these units of electricity watts. So that tells you right away, a university is really intensive, right? The electricity usage is more than the total average for somebody. So this is not even including your home. It's not including all the factories that make stuff. It's just your workplace has a higher electricity usage than the average across all Americans. And if you think of this as your workplace also, so if we multiply that 1,500 by 3 to get back to primary power, that's about 4,500 watts. Then we add another 2,300 watts. So suddenly we're at 6,800 watts. We're at 2/3 of the average usage is just coming from your workplace. It can't be that way for everybody, right? That's not the average across the US. So what this tells you is that there's something about either the University of Chicago or universities in general that makes them very energy intensive. So a university is not a low impact kind of organization. A big research university is so energy intensive that as an affiliate of UChicago, your energy usage is much more than the average Americans. And that's just regarding your home. So that's saying we're not even thinking about the fact you probably fly more than the average American, but you exist in an organization that's a very, very heavy energy user. Okay, so let's think about why that is. So I'm going to show you, again, this is 2015 data. I have not put this in the standard units that are the ones that any scientist would like. What I'm trying to show you is energy, so power, power per area of building. And instead of showing you the normal SI units would be watts as a power unit, and then square meters would be the unit of area, we're giving you these horrible English units of 1,000 British thermal units per year is our power units per square foot, because that's what engineers use. And so we're going to use those just because everyone else uses them. They make scientists head hurt, but it's just a simple conversion. So you can take this y-axis and convert it to watts per square meter if you want, and they're more comfortable with it. And what you see from this figure is there's a huge disparity across the buildings on campus, but that disparity correlates somehow to the type of building it is. So everything in red is a hospital. Everything in blue is one of the big biolabs. The stuff in light blue is a more physical science lab. The green buildings are teaching buildings. The orange is sort of anything that looked like something I couldn't identify, a hall, a theater. The pink is dining, the yellow is libraries, then we have offices, you have your dorms down here in very light green, and athletic facilities are in blue. And what you can see is that there's something about a biolab or a hospital that requires very high energy usage. And this is something to remember, that even though what you're familiar with is your dorms and your libraries, there are these other aspects of what goes on in campus that are tremendously large. And these biolabs also consume a lot, they also take up a lot more area than your dorm does. So I'm going to take this same graph now. So on the y-axis is the aerial energy intensity. And I'm going to plot it against the actual area of the building, but I'm going to take this and multiply by the average energy cost so that we get the mean energy cost per building. So that's the dollars per year that you spend on energy that goes to that building, the combination of natural gas and mixed steam and the electricity. And the one thing to note is on the y-axis, what I've done is, because I don't want to weight the electricity, I don't want to give electricity as sort of a cheater's benefit by only counting the electricity that we take on campus. What I'm doing is I'm effectively counting the primary energy that goes into the electricity. So I've multiplied the electricity by a factor of 3. And that makes the cost work out pretty evenly once I do that. So here is the same figure. Oops. Why is this not advancing? Right, okay, so here's the same figure, only what I've done now is the x-axis is sorted by energy cost in millions of dollars per year for individual buildings. And what you can see is among the non-hospital buildings, the Gordon Center, the GCIS building, uses, at least in 2015, used about $3 million a year just for that one building. All of our major energy consumers are these big labs, and all of your dorms and residence halls and teaching facilities and the buildings you may be more familiar with are clustered down here at effectively zero relative to the big guys. And you have to remember that the cost is directly correlated to their energy use, and that's directly correlated to their environmental impact. So most of the environmental impact on campus may be things that are invisible to you, that you don't see. And one of the things we hope to get out of this program is to help people sort of work through the university as a system to understand, where do its environmental impacts come from? You know, what is it that we have to do to understand how to reduce our impact? Some brief numbers before I turn it over to other people. If you compare to other universities, so our average for the non-hospitals, the dashed line here is our average inclusive of hospitals. When you take the hospitals out, our average is 319 kBTU per square foot per year. Cornell's, in the year I made the comparison, was 249. So I did this analysis partly to ask, is there anything that students can do to help out? And the answer was, actually, there's a lot that students can do to help out, because we're not the lowest energy user among universities. There's plenty of savings that can be found. Some of those savings are things that students can find. So if we happen to be like Cornell, just to put it in dollar terms, that would be a saving of almost $5 million a year. So figuring out what we can do better is something that's a win-win situation for the university and for people with environmental interests. It's not a conflict. It's in everybody's interest is in figuring out where these savings opportunities are and implementing them. And that's something I think that students can contribute to. And we've had students working with facilities for the last several years, and they've done some wonderful things, including doing surveys of all the labs and discovering that just by shedding fume hoods alone, we could save, they estimated, $200,000 a year just from that one action. And that set off a whole program in the physical science division called Shut the Sash, to try to figure out how to encourage people to keep their fume hoods shut and mandate that fume hoods be left shut. So most of the energy that's happening here is ventilation of these big laboratory buildings, which turn the air over in each lab multiple times an hour for safety reasons, which means you're pulling in outside air, you're reheating it up in the winter, and you're recooling it down in the summer, and then you dump all that air out again. So lab buildings are deliberately leaky because they have to be for safety. And that involves tremendous energy usage, and figuring out how to reduce that is probably the single best thing you could do to reduce the environmental impact of the university. And I hope that you get involved, and I hope that we get applications. I just wanted to put up 2 things. We'll distribute these slides afterwards. So these are just 2 links to projects that we've done through my research group, which is not about campus directly, but they're visualizations of how we use energy and how much energy we use. The one visualization is of the infrastructure associated with energy. I encourage you to look at these sites and learn more. And I'm always interested also in students who want to do direct research. And now I'll turn it over to facilities people to tell you about all the cool projects that they're thinking of doing this year.
Great. Hi, I'm Adam D'Ambrosio. I'm the Senior Director of Energy Services and Sustainability for Facility Services. I'm going to share my screen in a second here, and then go over some of the projects that we have. Can everybody see my screen now? Mm-hmm. Great. Great. So my plan is we have 4 potential projects. I'll review the first and second project, then I'll turn it over to Sarah Popenhagen to review project number 3, and then Brian Bozell to review project number 4. So the first project that's available is to evaluate the energy performance of University of Chicago laboratory buildings. And it was just a great discussion on the energy intensity of our lab buildings. Just a quick figure, we classify 11 buildings as laboratories, including research and teaching labs, and they're responsible for nearly 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. So they're incredibly energy intensive. So this is a really valuable project. What we have here, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to benchmark our lab buildings against similar existing laboratory buildings to show us how we compare around the country, and then identify the lab buildings with the greatest opportunities for energy savings. And then that lets us focus more of our attention on those buildings with the greatest potential for savings. This chart that we have here, this actually comes from the International Institute for Sustainable Labs. It's, the link is shown here. It's publicly available data. And this shows energy use intensities, which we just talked about, for higher education chemistry labs in our climate zone, zone 5A, which is cool and humid. And this shows, you can see here, we've got the source EUI, and we've got the percentage of the building that is dedicated to lab spaces. That has a big difference on buildings. So this is one form of benchmarking. And what we actually have here, these 2 green dots, or these darker shaded dots, are 2 of our lab buildings. And you may be able to guess from the previous slides which buildings they are. One of them is Kent, that's the lower one. And then the higher one is Searle Laboratory. So this shows how these laboratories compare. And then we entered in the percentage of lab area for each of these, so you can see how they compare to other similar lab buildings in similar environments. So this is the project. There's a ton of value here. What this can help us do is prioritize lab buildings. It can help us make the case for energy retrofits. And it shows outliers, labs that we should focus on. This one right here, again, is Searle. It shows it as an outlier. It's one of the higher energy users on campus. It also happens to be a LEED certified building. So that leads us to the next slide here, the next project, which is to benchmark the performance of UChicago LEED certified buildings. What I have here is a slide from the Livermore building database. Show the link here. It has a histogram and a scatter plot, and it can show the energy use intensities, mostly source energy use intensities of buildings. You can classify them the same way, the type of building, the climate. You can even filter out by LEED certification, Energy Star ratings. There's a lot of ways you can do this. And the reason we want to do this is the University of Chicago has 16 LEED certified buildings. Over to LEED Platinum. As I mentioned, Searle is one of those buildings. The reason we set that up, we require all projects that are over $5 million in value to achieve at least LEED Silver certification. The reason we do that is we want to reduce the carbon footprint of any new construction or any major renovations. We want to reduce the amount of energy use. One of the major categories for LEED certification is optimized energy performance. There are other ones. They include water, material, site selection, things like that. But energy accounts for roughly 1/6 of potential LEED points. So the belief is that if we require every new construction or major renovation of a certain size to achieve LEED Silver, that will lead to or result in more energy efficient buildings that have smaller carbon footprints. So we want to test that belief. That's the goal of this project. So what this will tell us is, we want to compare LEED buildings against similar buildings, again, similar characteristics, similar climates. Are we actually achieving more energy efficient buildings when we achieve LEED certification? So we think it's really important. It tests our belief, and it also can tell us, should we modify our policy? Or should we scrap it altogether? I mean, that's what it allows us to do. Is it effective? So again, what this is from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory Building Database. These graphs, you can create these graphs, and you can also download the data sets that go into them. So you can do quite a bit of analysis here, and this will be useful again to set direction and help us with our policies in terms of energy efficiency and LEED certification.
So Adam, Searle was not meeting its LEED model, right? And neither was Logan. And that's why Searle is so high, not because its LEED model was large, but because it wasn't meeting it, right? It was an operational issue. And that's why you decided to recommission?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So we are retrocommissioning part of our energy program is to retrocommission the buildings that are responsible for 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and labs are the most energy intensive buildings. So we're retrocommissioning all the lab buildings. And that means we're doing energy studies and making sure that they function properly. We've completed a retrocommissioning project at Searle. We have, I think, 4 labs this year that we're going to start very shortly. So absolutely right, though. I mean, LEED requires energy models, and the buildings don't actually always perform in line with their energy models. That's very common for a variety of reasons. So unless there are other questions, I will turn it over to Sarah to talk about project number 3.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Project number 3 is to design a UChicago sustainability app or dashboard to incorporate information that we currently already have on our sustainability map. So if you go to our sustainability website, right on the front page, there's a sustainability map that we've created. And you can click on that map and it'll lead you to another page where there's a static PDF sustainability map that you can download. And we've recently created that, but because it's just a static sustainability map, we would like to make it more dynamic and interactive so that guests and students, faculty, and staff in our campus community can use the map while they're actually on campus. And this would be to gain greater insight into and transparency into what's happening on campus as far as sustainability, including with our buildings. So currently what we have on the map is things like water bottle filling stations and bike racks, transportation options, and buildings that are LEED, green roofs, campus gardens and cafes. So we'd like all of that integrated into a sustainability app that people could use on their phones. And then in the future, we would like to be able to integrate additional features as we're able to become more transparent as a university. So for example, we'd like to be able to do things like include information about specific buildings, like maybe Energy Star scores, so that if you're walking by a building, you would receive a push notification and it could tell you what the Energy Star score of the building is, or maybe what the energy usage is in the building, or maybe even the greenhouse gas emissions of the building. And that way, as you're walking around campus, you could learn quite a bit about what's happening as far as sustainability, and also what projects maybe are happening in that building as far as energy conservation measures. And we would like this app to have modules so that we could start with information we have right now and then make it buildable so that we could build onto the app and include more and more information as we're able to. And one way to start this project would be to research existing apps that we have within the university and find out what you like about those apps and what you don't like. And then also to expand that research and look at other sustainability apps, both within higher education, but also beyond that, and find out what's good about those apps and what's not good about those apps, and kind of compile that research and use that information to create an app for our institution. And like I said, just something that we can start with the information that we have and then build on to increase communication and transparency for sustainability at our institution. And if there are no questions on that, we can turn it over to Brian for the next project.
I'm Brian Bazell, Energy and Utilities Manager in Facilities. I'm going to talk about the 4th project, which is conducting a cost-benefit analysis for potential energy conservation measures on campus. In our group, the Energy Services and Sustainability Group, we implement a lot of energy efficiency projects around campus. And one of the ways we evaluate those projects is by doing a cost-benefit analysis. This helps us come up with a list of projects and evaluate which ones would be most impactful and effective. You know, so in this example here, we have a table from Searle, that list out some of the projects that we came up with for the building. Basically, the first step that we usually do is we'll calculate the potential energy savings for each project in electricity, chilled water, and steam. And we'll also calculate the greenhouse gas emissions reduction so we can see how that project contributes to our greenhouse gas reduction goal. Then using our utility rates, we can calculate the estimated cost reduction for the different projects. And then using either rule of thumbs or reaching out to contractors, we'll get estimated cost to implement the projects. Once we know the cost of the project and the estimated cost savings, we can calculate the different metrics that we use to evaluate the projects, such as the simple payback, the net present value, internal rate of return, and the cost per metric ton. So those are all different financial metrics we can look at to figure out what projects would be more favorable. We also consider projects that may have a longer payback, but offer other benefits such as operational improvements, other features that might improve the comfort or just the general things in the building that could impact occupants. So for this project, we're looking for students to work with facility services to perform these cost-benefit analysis for different energy efficiency projects around campus. So I think with that, we can open it up for questions.
I think the way we're going to do questions is you raise your hand in the chat function. Do you guys all know how to do that in Zoom? And then Diana will pick the people to respond to.
Yep. So if you're looking at participants in Zoom, you should be able to click raise your hand if you do have a question.
I think Diana has to scroll up and down to find you, right? The hand people don't rise to the top.
Yes, so Nilanjana, who is our graduate student mentor, let me you should be good to go.
Okay, hi everyone. I just wanted to get us started off, and I had a generic question for Sarah, Brian, Adam, and Liz. What do you see as, measures of success at the end of it? End of project. There's going to be a deliverable, but also learning goals. There are general expectations from the RAs.
Do you want me to answer? I'm not the facilities person, but from my standpoint, I would say, a project like this is research of a sort, but it is different from academic research. What I would consider success, and I'm dumping some of our research money into this, so, I get a little bit of a stake in saying what the success is, but is doing something that is actionable, that produces a decision, that, produces a report that people read, that they respond to, that they trust, and that they make a decision based on. And that's something really difficult to do something, an analysis which is not just suggestive or interesting, but is actually trustable enough for someone to say, okay, this will now change the way I act. And that's really good practice to say, what does it take for students to figure out what it takes to come to a conclusion that is solid enough that somebody will put money behind it to make a change. And it seemed really important that these aren't just sort of speculative projects or, purely, it's educational to figure out how to be useful. So we really intend these programs to actually be useful.
Hi, it's Adam. I can speak to, for example, project number 2. What I would love to see that would be really helpful is we haven't done this. We haven't gone back and looked in a focused way on the performance of LEED certified buildings. It'd be really helpful for us to understand how we're performing against peer or similar buildings. And if we're underperforming, to dive a little deeper to figure out why, what's behind it. Is it because we're not going about it the right way? We're not getting the right LEED points? The buildings are underperforming for a variety of reasons, whether it's operational or how they were built or designed. So to me, having the answers to those questions, how LEED buildings are performing, and then taking the next step and diving a little deeper into why they're either performing well or they're underperforming, and then learning those lessons as our project planners and designers and construction folks, if we can share those lessons with them, we can improve future performance of upcoming major renovations and buildings based on it. So I find a lot of value into it, but I really want to be able to take that data and go the next step and start asking the whys.
This is Sarah Popenhagen. Thank you, Liz and Adam, for that. I agree with what you're saying. I think for projects 1, 2, and 4, it's getting information that we can use to make informed decisions, which is, I think, what you're both saying. And then I think for project 3, the sustainability app, is having a work product of something that we can actually use and deploy to people's phones, and then be able to add on to and have future releases with more and more information.
So I'll say on apps, there's a huge genre of crappy supposed sustainability energy apps that are used by other universities. They often come from one particular company that they just contract with, that they make lots of pretty graphs and numbers, and you can't derive any insight from them. So figuring out how to present information in a way that is quantitative and that the numbers actually mean something and that we learn something and they're informative, and that's what we want, you know, not just a beautiful picture with a line that goes up and we're like, look, numbers, we must be quantitative, right? And so we can do better. That's why they're not if facilities didn't just contract with some company to say, oh, give me some dashboard that kind of makes the parents happy, and you know, then we don't care if anybody actually learns anything. We want to do something that's actually useful.
Great. So our next question comes from Wesley Chen. Wesley, go ahead.
Thank you. I was wondering that given the current pandemic, if we would be able to telecommute or not have to return to campus, or if everything would have to be done in person for the internship.
I can say the reason that everybody pushed this off to summer quarter is we're hoping people can come back to campus. If we can't, I think we would have to have a separate meeting to talk about whether what can be done. I mean, probably the app development could maybe happen off campus, but we haven't really talked about it. We are operating under the assumption that by summer it will be possible for people to return. And we haven't fully digested the implications if that's not true.
Leslie, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Next question is from Julia Spondi.
Yes, hi. Well, thank you all for the great presentation. And I just have a question I hope someone from facilities could speak to. Because I'm happy to hear that building projects over $5 million have to be LEED certified, but I haven't seen the proposed LEED certification for the Woodlawn dorm yet, and I was just kind of curious what that looks like currently.
Adam, this is Sarah. Did you want me to speak to that, or do you prefer to?
Sarah, if you want to go ahead, and I can jump in if necessary.
Yeah, Julia, we do have worked with the developer on that project around LEED certification, and the project has been designed to LEED as much as possible. So it is LEED designed, but is not currently pursuing LEED certification due to a change in the current LEED rating system. There was one prerequisite that was not able to be met as far as the LEED certification due to a change in the current rating system. If you want, I can email you separately and with all of the details on that and all of the LEED features that are being pursued, but unfortunately it wasn't possible due to a change in the rating system with one of the prerequisites. But other than that, it is pursuing many features that are sustainable, just LEED design, but not actually pursuing the rating system in that one instance.
Yes, I'd be happy to receive any information you have on that front. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great. If you could email us at the Office of Sustainability email inbox that's on our website under Contact Us, I'd be happy to share the information with you. If there's anyone else on the call who's interested in the same, just please email us at our Office of Sustainability inbox, and we'd be happy to share that with you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for the question.
So next question is from Hannah Richter. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I was wondering if working with environmental frontiers over the summer leads to any potential work during the full-time school year, if EF is planning on having undergraduate research assistants work on other projects once this one comes to fruition.
So in the past, some number of the students who work in the summers continued on during the school year. You know, we still have to work out funding sources and make sure that there's funding available, but I would think it's a safe bet to say that there are at least some opportunities, and certainly it's something that we want students to be engaged in. The question is about the number of paid positions. I know Sabina has a lot of programs ongoing during the year that are not paid but involve class credit. So I think there's going to be lots of opportunities to stay involved. And what I'm hoping is that we can find enough funding lines that we can actually pay students as research assistants as well. But either way, there'll be opportunity.
This is Sabina. I just jump in on that. Yeah, so I think that our goal is for this to be ongoing. I think we have two goals. One is that to make this happen this summer, sort of regardless of where we are, that could potentially change the number of projects or the projects that we are able to run. But going into next year as well, I think the goal is for this to be an ongoing project that evolves over time based on the results we get from the first set of projects. And so some of it might be through paid research assistantships, some would be through curricular initiatives, and you know, given in our program, you know, we have college fellowships. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we are planning to make this an ongoing project, and in collaboration too with some of the student, the RSOs and the student groups too.
Thank you.
There should also be a possibility to participate as an Odyssey Scholar if anybody's an Odyssey Scholar. So that's a separate mechanism that also provides a stipend.
Great.
If I can add one more thing, sorry. I don't know how many of you are enrolled in the College Summer Institute for this summer. The focus is on water, and potentially some of the EF projects could be developed as your summer project if you're enrolled in the College Summer Institute for this year. I don't know if anyone is here. I think at least one person is, but I haven't looked at the full list.
Great. Next question is from Dinesh Dasgupta. Dinesh, you can go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much for the presentation, guys. Really enjoyed it and really excited about the environmental frontiers on campus. Just kind of dovetailing off Wesley's question. So I know a lot of internships are starting to get canceled now. Is there a potential that this would be canceled as well? Or would you guys be more likely to shift it from like if there was a problem with the projects and people had to do things remotely, would you cancel or would you move it to another project, say?
I can tell you what we've talked about. I mean, we certainly already moved it once because of, you know, the closure. If there was a problem with getting back in the summer, I am sure that we would just shift it to the academic year. The one thing that we talked about, and I think this is policy, we'll have to confirm with other people, we wanted the Thursday deadline so that we could get notification to people who need to lock up their internship for the summer. We do actually anticipate that there will be a lot of students whose internships are canceled this summer who've been doing something else. So if this goes on, the one change that we will make is that we'll consider applications that come in after Thursday. You know, if we get great applications from people who say, I was set up for this internship in New York City and it's not happening now, and so now I'm scrambling to find something, there's still, the door is not absolutely closed if you apply after Thursday. It's just that we wanted to make sure that we notify people, you know, on a regular timescale. So that's the one change that we're making. But if people can't get back in the summer, we'll figure something out for next year.
Okay, thank you.
So at present, I don't see any other raised hands. But do please raise your hand if you have another question. One other thing to notice, I mean, again, as both Liz and Sabina have said, this is all evolving, but another aspect of EFCampus that we're hopeful we'll be able to offer is, so in addition to the data systems that the team at Facility Services manages, much of that same data is publicly available via the City of Chicago. I know many of you students have tinkered with that data. But we are hopeful that in addition to the data training that the research assistants will receive, we can offer just an open data training on the publicly available data for anybody who's interested. Again, just to give kind of additional learning and context around how this campus building data is tracked and what you can do with it. So that's something to stay tuned for. Hopefully we'll have more information about that come summer, or we might do that in the fall. I see a hand raised from Jay Foldy. So
I just had a question for Professor Moyer, just about the slide that you showed on comparing us to Cornell.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the units that were used for that, was that accounting for, just because I don't totally remember for thermal units if the foot squared is included in the energy.
It is the foot squared. So it's always energy per square foot. That's always the metric.
So then,
what you have to be careful about, there's two things, is first whether you include hospitals or not.
Yes.
Because the hospitals are high energy users, and so the proportion of hospital buildings you have can really throw you off. So this was a no hospitals number on the assumption that the rest of campus is similar to Cornell, but of course, to make a fair comparison, you have to say exactly how much bio research is there and how many bio faculty, and so it's a crude number in that sense. It's not exactly doing building by building comparison, but it's always by square foot. The other thing that you have to be careful when you look at those numbers is whether they're what they call source EUI. So energy use intensity EUI is the number, and there's a source and a site version of the same number. So the site EUI just takes all the electricity in these units of watts of electricity and adds them together with your natural gas usage in terms of watts of primary power in the natural gas. But that is completely unfair because it makes your electricity look like it's not a particularly high energy user, because you're not accounting for the fact that you needed 3 times as much primary power to make the electricity in the first place. Do you buy that?
Yeah.
So site EUI will undervalue the electricity, and therefore it won't be tied to the cost, right? So source EUI is an attempt to say, what is the primary power required to service this building? And that includes all of the energy, the fossil fuel that went into making the electricity in the first place. So it basically, the simple hack is just to take your building electricity use and multiply by a factor of 3. So Cornell typically reports, if you look at their website, they'll typically report site EUI and not source EUI, so you have to correct for that. So I've done an attempt to correct for that from Cornell, but you can find that on their website.
Is that then just their labs, or because I was just thinking in terms of the scale that they're much bigger?
It's too small. It's too small for lab only. A lab would be a higher number. That number is smaller than their lab average would be. Because it includes all the offices and dorms and residences also. So the kind of benchmarking that facilities is talking about is much more specific. Instead of saying, look at a campus average, we're like, okay, what about for a chemistry lab? Let's just assume we need chemistry. We're not talking about should we have less chemistry and more poetry, right? So we're not going to reduce, that would reduce our environmental impact, but nobody's asking that question. What they're just asking is this a good chemistry lab for the purpose that it serves and the climate that it's in? And then you get very specific about it.
All right, thank you.
But Cornell has an extremely this project, the whole idea of involving students comes because other universities have been very successful at it. And Cornell has a very heavy student involvement, and they work directly with facilities. And they've done a very good job, and they have lots of cost-effective projects, and the students really contribute. So we said, why can't we do the same thing?
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any. Oh, here, Hannah Morin with a question. Hannah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello, Hello. So this is a bit of a specific question, but do you guys know why the Searle Chemistry Building is such a huge producer of emissions versus, say, GCIS? Is it just the age? Is it the type of research?
Yeah, it's Adam. I can start to address that. Brian, if you've got any specific insights since you completed the recent retro-commissioning project, please jump in. But, you know, it's a very intensive building for energy because it uses a lot of outside air. There's air changes that are required for safety, for laboratory hoods. There's a variety of things. So it's one of the more energy intensive buildings just because of the purpose it serves. We've also, and to some point, we retro-commission buildings. We can find savings opportunities, but there's an initial design. The way a building is designed kind of puts some limitations on it. So,
forgive me for interrupting.
Yeah.
I'm a chemistry major, so I'm fairly familiar with the buildings and the fume hoods.
Yeah.
Does Searle have more fume hoods? Is it that they're older? I realize this is a niche question, so don't waste too much time on it.
Yeah, no, and it's a great question. I think it'd be a great subject of part one, right? So you're trying to find out why a building doesn't perform compared to its peers. So I think you have to do a comparison to its peers. What is the percentage of lab space? What's the density of fume hoods? All these factors, and compare them and see if that's the reason or if it's simply a design or performance issue. I think the value we'll get out of this internship.
So this is Liz, just to say two things. First, in my, Searle has evolved in its usage over time, but certainly it underperformed relative to its original energy model. So you have that piece of information. It wasn't doing what the builder thought it would do, and that can also be because they had different usage than was envisioned. The other thing is, a couple years ago, we didn't have any sort of metric of the number of fume hoods per building.
What is it?
Can you guys mute? Somebody's doing background noise, so please mute if you're not talking. Because of student involvement, undergrads doing work, we now have an inventory of all of the plug load equipment in the campus, all of the fume hoods, the type of fume hood, the maker of fume hoods, the linear square feet, whether it has automatic sash closure or not. Like that was all compiled by undergrads literally walking from lab to lab. And so we have this awesome database now for this kind of study that couldn't have been done, 3 years ago.
Would it be possible to have public access to that database?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. Facilities would have to, I would guess there's privacy issues in saying what equipment is in what lab, but I don't know. Okay. Adam, do you have a policy on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we publicly share that data, but I think as part of the internship, when you're comparing energy use, that would be something you would be able to look at, right? So you'd be able to those why questions, and that helps you answer those why questions.
Yeah.
I asked just because sometimes labs comparing to other labs might be helpful for their own information.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things. Once you have this is where we were stymied, in 2016 because there was no compilation of any of this data. So we're like, we don't know what the building should be doing because we don't really know what its function is. And now that all that data has been assembled, so obviously the plug load could change if people totally do different things from one year to the next, but it's not likely to. Now that all that information is there's room for all kinds of good analyses, and there's certainly. You can't necessarily compare to, a Cornell lab is not going to tell you how many square feet of, or how many linear feet of fume hood they have, but there's plenty of sort of operation standards that you could use to say what should a lab with this equipment be using. A lot of the fume hood consumption is just whether it's up or down, right? It makes a huge difference. And what you find, if you work in chem, I'm sure the grad students will get annoyed at the automatic closures, and so they prop it open, right?
We do, yeah.
And so then you have to have the behavioral modification is how do you get them not to do that? Because they think this is easier for me, but it's a huge energy loss when they do that.
Thank you.
So I just want to say that there's room for all kinds of people on these projects. Like we'd love to have chem people who know exactly what happens in a lab, but we'd also like to have econ people who think about, how do I nudge people to do something differently, or people who are better at doing a cost benefit analysis. there's room for programmer people for doing apps. There's room for all kinds of different skill sets. And what we were hoping is we get enough diverse students applying that we can put them in groups so that they complement each other.
Diana, this is Sabina. I have a question that I just got separately here, which is, can graduating students still apply?
Yep. So at this time, we will consider graduating students. So we welcome those graduating this spring to submit applications.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
You have 11 more minutes, so now's your chance. Anything can be about, I personally have questions I'd love to ask Brian and Adam and Sarah. If you guys don't have any, I want to ask them more detail. Ask them how it works. Ask them how it maintains itself. These buildings are incredibly complicated. These are not just like walls and a roof. These are like, they have automated climate control units down in the basement that are very complicated machines.
Well, Liz, this is Sabina. Here's a question that maybe somebody is thinking. If once you've had a chance to digest this, if you have questions for any of us, can we all be reached over email, or should they be sent to Diana, or what's the best way to send any questions along?
Yeah, I think any follow-up questions can be sent to me. That's Diana. My email is dpetty, P-E-T-T-Y, @uchicago.edu. So yeah, if you have any follow-up questions, send them to me and I can either triage to the rest of the group or hopefully just answer you directly.
And we'll distribute some version of these slides.
Correct.
You'll have the copy.
Yep, we'll distribute the slides as well as the recording, the video recording of the session.
So for graduating seniors, if you don't have an immediate job lined up, I do think this and actually for anybody, I think this kind of thing is an extremely valuable kind of job experience to have on your CV, right? Especially if you can say, identified actionable projects that resulted in savings of, X 100,000 per year, right? That's the kind of thing a lot of people want to go off and do, in their professional careers anyway, if they have environmental interests. So showing that you can start working on something like that as a student that has, that achieves its objectives, that is a real analysis, that produces savings, that people acted on your recommendation, that's a really powerful thing to have on a CV.
Hi, Brian. Hi, this is Nilanjana again. So I was wondering, maybe other people have this question also, but on the CBA, the options you have on that Excel sheet, are they already identified and for the scope of the project, it's about finding what the costs and benefits are, or is it an open, this list can be modified and other things can be suggested?
Yeah, I think this was an example from a past project, so we'd be looking to develop a new list to evaluate as part of this project.
Okay, and this is an example of how specific, let's say, it should be.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Brian. Like, what is some of the interesting cost savings projects you guys have developed in the last couple of years? I haven't talked to you that much in this time. Like, have you identified something really interesting that you're proceeding with?
Yeah, we have a lot of projects going on. This list here was from Searle. I think there were a lot of interesting ones around fume hoods. That's one of the biggest users in the lab, and different things we're able to do to reduce energy there. And some of the other labs, we're looking at like demand control ventilation, or there's other ways we can reduce either fume hood airflow or the number of air changes in the lab to reduce energy. We're doing campus-wide projects around lighting or insulation. There's different things related to steam or electricity consumption.
And an interesting project we're evaluating at one of our lab buildings where we have cooling towers, their own chill water plant. They use a lot of water, so it's not necessarily energy, but it's water. And we've got a project that we're evaluating where we take all the outside air that we're cooling during the summer, and we're taking the moisture out of it, right, the water out of it, taking that and then using it for makeup water in the cooling tower. So how do we avoid waste? Instead of sending that water down the drain, send it to the cooling tower so it can be used to cool the chill water or air conditioning plants. So that's another thing. So we're trying to avoid all that waste of energy and water. So there's a lot of interesting projects out there. Brian mentioned insulation. It's not exciting actually, but it's one of the best things you can do is simply insulate pipes and components of the house. We've got a huge project that we're starting this summer that Brian's heading up on that.
But that's what I think is so important, not, like you say, oh, look, the lighting in the Regenstein Library is all sexy and I notice it, but maybe like insulating your hot water pipe is way more important to do. Mm-hmm. So it's really useful to do the discipline of saying, I don't want to do a symbolic gesture. I want to do an actual project that has actually important. And they may not be the ones that you think they are. And learning how do you figure out, how to understand a whole system is really valuable for students. Just to have that experience of saying, I really need to get my head wrapped around the university as a system and try to understand, it's taking in energy, it's putting out services, how is it doing that? Where are the losses?
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons we put that cost per metric ton of equivalent of CO2 saved, used, is to value, to look at how good of an investment this is for the university. How can we get the maximum impact, the maximum greenhouse gas reduction for the dollars we have? That is a great column right there. Mm-hmm. You'll see some of those very simple things like insulation will have just such a low number. You get a great impact for very few dollars. So a key, our financial people like net present value and IRR, but just managing our dollars for metric tons reduction, that last column is fantastic.
That number is megatons. MT is
metric tons.
Metric tons. So it's 160. So that's a pretty expensive project.
Actually, that's not bad at all.
Really?
That's pretty decent. Yep.
Wow. We're talking about a $40 ton of tax. People think is too much. That people would never possibly support that.
Yeah.
You're saying 168 a ton will still get you positive return.
And the thing that you have to remember is that is per year. So that's every single year you're reducing it.
Oh. It's one-time outlay, but it's the CO2 per year?
It's the metric tons per year of reduction, yes. So it's not a one-time. So you may be looking at $40 for a one-ton reduction. This is 1 ton every year.
Of the building lifetime. Okay, so the actual number is much smaller. Right, that makes sense.
That's correct.
So just one other question. Like, I was also curious about, I know there's been a lot of talk about labs and stuff. So in terms of when we're talking campus wide, is this also including the professional schools and the medical center, or is it just specific to like labs and the college campus buildings and the steam plant? Just curious.
So the professional schools, like the biz school is not a big energy consumer. It's just a big office building. Yeah. Same with the Harris School. The medical center is a huge energy consumer, but they have all kinds of other issues. And plus right now it's not their big concern, right? The doctors in the hospital have other issues to worry about. But even in general, it's working on, everything you do in a chemistry lab, you have to balance energy efficiency and safety. That's why all those air changes exist, to keep you safe. And those constraints are even more in a hospital. So none of these projects are focused on using the hospitals, which are administered by the Biological Sciences Division, just because it's just too big a job. You can't do things quickly. All these changes have to be balanced against patient safety. So hospitals are out, and the professional schools that act like office buildings are just not interested enough to be major focuses.
Thank you.
I mean, if Booth were doing something crazy, that would be important. But in my understanding, it's not. Like if Booth were like, let's have giant Klieg lights to spell out Booth in the sky every night with a spotlight, and that was a huge energy user, then it would be perfectly reasonable to have a project that suggested that was not a good idea. But I don't think that's what they're doing.
So we have another question from Jay Foldy, and I think this will be our last one so that we can conclude at 1:30.
Yeah, sorry, I was just wondering for that chart that had been shown earlier, I think you'd said that there was a version of it for Chicago, the one that had all of the energy sources, and then had the 2/3 of it is wasted through inefficiencies. I was just wondering where we could find that information, or if you were going to send out a link with it.
Oh, I don't think there's a Sankey. There's not a Sankey for Chicago specifically that I know of. The Lawrence Livermore does them for individual countries, but in not so. So Diana doesn't have the version of the slides, but I will send them to her. I have a link. We've done a project with actually a history PhD student where he developed a data set for constructing a Sankey all the way back to 1800. And the address for that is us.sankey.rigsep.rdcep.org. It'll bump you to a separate, it'll redirect you. And we're working with the Research Computing Center to prettify that up and make it a teaching tool. So we're trying to figure out how do we let people look at changes over time in a way that's understandable. Okay. I think you couldn't do something that's regionally specific because, you know, it's hard. You can't decide what, there are state by state versions that Lawrence Livermore does, but it's a little bit ambiguous because, you know, you can't really say this power plant produces electricity for me because the grid is nationwide. But it is quite interesting. If you go to Lawrence Livermore, you can see, you know, that certain southern states are predominantly coal driven. If you go up to Washington or Oregon, it's predominantly hydro for electricity. So there are big changes. Illinois is very heavily nuclear. So that red line on the Sankey becomes much larger if you consider only power plants within Illinois.
Thank you.
All right, 1:30 on the nose. So thank you again to all of our presenters, and thanks to all of our participants for taking the time to join. We will notify you as soon as the slides and the recording are posted. And of course, the application again is due tomorrow by midnight. You can find the application, again, there's a link in these slides, but it is up on the College Center for Research and Fellowships website. And also linked out from the Mansueto Institute homepage. And if you do have any follow-up questions after this, feel free to email me, Diana Petty, and I'll certainly get back to you. But we hope that this gave you a little bit of additional insight into how EFCampus will work and the types of research and truly, you know, kind of learning and hands-on opportunities that we'd like to provide for you around campus sustainability. So any other closing thoughts, Liz or Sabina?
No, just I've been really encouraged by the student interest. And I mean, I think the team working on energy at facilities are a bunch of great people. And I hope that students take up this opportunity.
Yeah, I agree that the turnout for this webinar is fantastic. And I wanted to thank Sarah, Brian, and Adam, and Liz and Diana for putting this all together. It's great.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thanks to all, and stay safe. We'll certainly update you as things evolve, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.